This is the InfoSec and Notes Show. I'm Josh Amishav. Today's guest is James Linton, who you might know better as Sign-On Reborn on Twitter or the email prankster. We're going to focus on email-based social engineering today. According to the FBI, business email compromise is one of the most financially damaging scams out there. My three main takeaways from the conversation were: one, some tactical tips on how to gain rapport on the initial contact; two, common risks associated with email-related fraud; and three, how to protect yourself against email scams. You'll enjoy those two things plus a bunch of other tips along the way. Direct support for this podcast comes from BreachSense, the data breach monitoring platform. More details can be found at breachsense.io. And now here's my conversation with James. James Linton, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Josh. Thank you for inviting me on.
So, who are you and why do you have a Wikipedia page?
Good question. I guess, who am I? I'm a social engineer primarily. Well, that's the sort of umbrella that I fall under the most. But the Wikipedia page, it basically mentions my email prankster days, which was back in 2017. More through idle hands and sort of, I don't know, I think it was a bit of a midlife crisis. I think there was loads of little things that just sort of created the perfect storm for me. Initially tricking the CEO of Barclays that I was the chairman, that being successful, and then just kind of liking the idea that I was good at something new as well, because I was struggling a bit in my career at the time. I felt I was a bit lost in that respect. So suddenly had this thing and people were, interested in it. And that was, I guess, something that I wanted to keep rolling as best I could. So being in advertising and being mindful, I was like, well, what is my raison d'etre here? What is the thing that I've captured? And it seemed to be very basically tricking the CEOs of banks. So I thought, well, let's trick another CEO of a bank and see if that works. So the security aspect and being shocked about how easy it was probably just started gently rolling in after that, because prior to that, I had no real idea that this was, a malicious tactic that cyber criminals use. That just didn't cross my mind. I hadn't, Googled what do cyber criminals do or anything like that. It just kind of was something that I naturally stumbled upon. So it was interesting how it went down a parallel channel to what actually happens out there, really. I could have saved myself a lot of time and effort by reading up on it, I guess, rather than having my own sort of voyage of discovery about what works and what doesn't.
So can you walk us through, how did this, I think over a span of, was about a year, maybe less, maybe more?
No, it's about 5 months from sort of, beginning to end.
Okay. And you sent a whole bunch of spoofed emails to various people, including, I think, Eric Trump. You had some White House correspondents who had a whole bunch of banks based out of the UK. And you were generally successful in convincing these people that you were somebody else.
Yeah, quite a few of the banks were US as well. There was Citibank, Goldman Sachs. I can't remember the others now.
Okay, so how did it start? You were what brought you to start sending these emails?
It was two things. I think it was one, as a UX designer, I'd noticed that the user experience of an email client was reducing the technical information. It was making it more personal. Hi Dave, hi Janet. That kind of, and then into the message. And I thought, there's really not much there that's kind of verifying that is the person. You've got a name, you've got a block of text that's been written by somebody. There's obviously a tone in that, and there's relevancy about the message. But other than that, if you kind of replicated the tone, would somebody, believe it was that person if you sent a message? So where I worked, I kind of pretended to be the CEO and sent a few jokey emails around. And largely they were successful. It was an eye-opener. In conjunction with this, I also had a thing where if I had a problem with a product or service, sometimes feeling a bit ghosted and like I had no real way of having a voice in the disagreement, shall we say, that I would just email the CEO directly and just state my case as, as logically as possible. And then at least I felt I'd done all I could to try and get it rectified. And quite often it would result in something happening or an acknowledgement. It did kind of work. And for me, it also seemed quite easy to guess what a CEO's email address was. I couldn't really believe that it was sort of that easy. It seemed like it seemed like this crazy thing that only I'd figured out. Obviously, it completely wasn't. But to me, it felt like this way of beating the natural system, I guess, of being able to actually take your disagreement right to the person who you think should know about it. So those two kind of merged, the pranking and the disagreement with a company. And before I knew it, I had a Gmail account set up in the name of the Barclays chairman approaching the CEO. And it went really well. It went amazingly. My heart was in my mouth a bit because this was the first sort of out in the wild exchange that I'd had. And it was very much ad hoc. I was just lying on the bed watching Netflix. There was no kind of premeditation to it. At one stage, I'd kind of said to him that, oh, I'll be back about this. But then I just forgot and carried on. And it was literally a news article that made me remember again that I said I'd come back. And it being their annual general meeting, I thought, well, let's... And it was about 8:00 at night as well. There wasn't much time left in the day to get this done. But, creating a Gmail account, 2 minutes, quick read of a news article to find some sort of commonality that I could mention, another 3 or 4 minutes, and then it was sent. So it was, quick and fast, I guess.
So I want to dig down a bit into, I guess, the more technical parts. So just two things that you mentioned. One of them is finding your target's email address. Was that is just as simple as seeing the format that the company uses and then guessing, or would you telnet to port 25 and run a recipient to and put in various email addresses and check what the response status was?
As it went on, I experimented with kind of seeing what bounce backs I got, maybe looking occasionally some financial institutions with longer domain names hidden away in the terms and conditions of the website, or the kind of privacy policy. You might see a slightly different domain that they could possibly use, internally rather than the kind of outwardly facing domain. So it was a bit of an experiment, I guess. Often it's a bit like a private number plate, I guess, and a bit like the naming of a personal email address. Ideally, you want it to be very descriptive of who you are, i.e. your actual name, and with as little annoyance as possible. If you start adding in weird characters and underscores and full points and things like that in a kind of random way, then it actually makes it very hard for you to give out your email address over the phone and things like that. Because at one stage I did create this unguessable email address, and I was like, I could never explain this to somebody over the phone because it had pluses in it, it had all sorts of stuff. It made no sense, and I couldn't even remember it. So I quickly ruled out that as a way of solving email crime for good. But yeah, generally, like I said, it kind of follows the logic that somebody wants it to be pretty descriptive. And there's certain set formats, probably, I guess, 10, that are more often than not going to be the ones that they use. In America, it gets slightly trickier, because they use their middle name a lot. So you can often have an underscore with a character and then another underscore or a full point. And that can make it tricky, especially if their middle name isn't mentioned anywhere else online. Then you can have a bit of a challenge on your hands. But yeah, more often than not, if you've had a reply from somebody who already works there, I think companies, sometimes it's inconsistent. So you can never take it for read that it is their email address. But the one thing that I always had to be 99% sure of was that the email address, especially if it was a celebrity or something like that, was that person on the other end of the inbox. Because if I was to just sit there and try and guess everybody's email address, I could send an email out and I'd have the horrible thing of not knowing if I was chatting with another scammer or another person pretending to be that person. And that for me would drive me mental. So I had to do as much as I could to verify, yeah, I know that this is their email address. And just over time, I found different ways of doing it. And none of it was particularly complex. I wasn't hugely technical. I never spoofed an email address. I never made it look like it was sent from one that it wasn't. Ever. In fact, I even once sent an email to the White House using my emailprankster.co.uk domain name, just changing the display name. That's all I ever did, change the display name. The rest of it was made up. It was free accounts. It was mail.com. It was Gmail. It was Outlook. It was Yandex. It was, over time, I found that I couldn't create, loads of email addresses at a certain vendor. So I had to, like a single email, single phone number. So I'd have to go off in search of random ones to try and create some more. But there was never any huge technical step, or A, because I didn't know how to do that. B, I just liked the idea that it was the bare minimum of effort technically to get through, literally just having a weird domain name. And then that put all the fun and the challenge for me in the content of that message. That became the thing where I knew I could win or lose by contacting someone.
Okay, let's talk about the content of the message. You would, in order to, I guess, be convincing, there'd probably a number of linguistic I don't want to say manipulations, but you'd have to identify patterns of communication or patterns of speech, right? How people talk, and then change your message to fit that pattern. What were the important bits that you needed to get right in order to be successful?
Initially, I always chose a chairman as who was going to be the chairman to CEO dynamic, because I don't know if they were always slightly above a CEO, probably not, because they're not sort of running the entire business, but there seemed to be a lot of leeway in how a chairman would speak. They could speak from experience. That experience could be something that they learned in a war. It could be something that they read in a poem. It didn't have to be, you need to do this, do that. And the character for me became very, and it was slightly cartoonified, I guess, in my head. I was imagining these Park and All sort of leather chairs with, whiskey stains on it and stuff. And, it did kind of go as far as that, because I was like, well, I've not interacted with that many chairmen. How should I say this? And then over time, I learned the best way to look like I was, not saying this correctly, but yeah, I think over time that I learned that there was a certain knack to getting that nugget of trust at the beginning. And more often than not, it was saying a lot less than saying a lot more. Because once you've got that initial reply from them and they're sort of trusting of that message, it's amazing how far you can then, how much leeway you get. Obviously, there's a few landmines. If you hit a certain word or a phrase that, they would never use, that can, snap the kind of connection and they will rumble it. So you have to be slightly careful, especially targeting people in America. I had to be a bit careful. I did make mistakes, a bit careful about the grammar and words that I used. And I used soiree at one point, and apparently that's not commonly used in America. I mean, it was something that I attributed to Jared Kushner, so I think everyone thinks he's a little bit poncy. So it was I kind of got away with it. But yeah, it was finding out how little I could say or how I could gain that trust without needing any real personal information. And over time, I learned that in business communication, like over email, and perhaps in email to a larger extent, there's you may be a real character in real life, but in your day-to-day emails, that's probably not coming through as much. You're not with every reply referencing the things that your colleagues did on Instagram that week, or, there's not that detailed personal information. So I never kind of went onto anyone's Instagram accounts to kind of bring relevancy and plausibility up as high as I could. I just did a Google News search and found the most recent news article that mentioned company X, whoever it was. Immediately you've got something you can mention. You can just send a link to that article and say, have you seen this? Or, you might spot a comment by somebody that's a bit derogatory, and you could just put, I see Davidson is rolling out against us again. You can keep it super short, and it's not really asking for a reply. It's just kind of, FYI, here's this thing. And occasionally you'll get like a very small reply, but after that initial kind of chemistry connection of trust is sort of there with that email thread. So you can then go back for a bit more. Obviously, it's still delicate. You could completely hit the wrong buttons, and because you essentially are working very much in the dark. You've not got much to work with. But like I said, luckily there is a kind of lexicon of ways that people carry out stuff at work. There's set processes. You see this especially with BEC, that payments and stuff, they can use very similar requests because most companies follow the same process. It doesn't have to be tailored for the company. Essentially, somebody sending a request for payment to one company, they would send it to another one as well because it just works. That is how people ask for stuff. So all they're really doing is changing the names out and repurposing these parts of Office process, I guess.
So what surprised you most from the whole ordeal?
That's an interesting question. I'm not sure what surprised. I guess I was surprised that nobody got really irate at me, and nobody kind of occasionally, like Eric Trump said, I'm forwarding this to the authorities. I just thought, well, you're not, mate, are you? Because the last thing you want to do is let any government official near your inbox. So I just kind of knew that what I was actually doing was a bit of an uncashable check. It was this sort of, because there was a little hint of embarrassment at the end of it and I'd not walked away with anything of value, it was sort of pointless to take it further. So I guess that was a surprise that I managed to avoid anyone getting really annoyed about it, I guess.
So you were never arrested, you were never interrogated, you were never questioned?
I never had a single email from anyone. And, fairly, well, kind of 2/3 of the way through, my identity was out there. I'd made a bit of a mistake because I wasn't thinking as a threat actor. I was just thinking somebody having a laugh. So I wasn't trying to hide every IP address for every message I sent probably went straight back to my house. I never used a VPN. I just never did any of this stuff because to me, it didn't exist because I didn't know about it. So yeah, there was no kind of contact. The only contact I had was really with the kind of security as such was when I tried to trick Ian Levy, the chief technical director at the NCSC, and he spotted what I was trying to do and then asked me to co-write a blog post with him. So he was very sort of, I guess progressive in kind of putting a bit of trust in me. And that really was the turning point for me to move into a security mindset and leave the pranks behind. That bit of trust was just at the perfect moment for me to take my kind of raw skill set and use it for something actually, beneficial. Because, the pranks were pretty throwaway. People enjoyed them at the time because of who I was targeting. It kind of gave the little man a bit of or woman, a bit of light relief, I guess, at the time, especially when I was doing certain right-wing figures in America. But then it sort of, in a way, I'm really glad that my identity got out and it came to a natural conclusion because knowing me, I probably would have taken it too far. Eventually, I just would have got, at a certain stage, it was all about, right, how can I make this more complicated? How can I keep challenging myself to make this more elaborate? And I think that would have been a dangerous path to keep carrying on down, to be fair.
What are the common risks associated with email-related fraud?
I kind of break it down into two bits. So you've got the kind of conventional business email compromise, which is pretending to be or assuming the identity of an actual person. So the CEO, somebody in HR. They're the kind of the big two, I guess, which is a human interacting with another human. And that can only be for one of three or four things. And, to make a payment, to, open or download something, to visit a website and give you credentials, and to run a task or errand. And that's where the gift card scam kind of sits under. I think there's a certain respect that the numbers that are involved are slightly swelled by gift card scams, which are a little bit... I know that they cost people money. I just think it's very hard to see them as, a really credible cyber threat. They're more of an annoyance, I think, that somebody could get, less than £1,000 or $1,000 worth of gift cards out of somebody by tricking them. It's for me, it's more of a BC light type attack. It's a very much kind of the first rung of the cyber ladder. You are trying to trick someone using the bare minimum of skill, a very low probability of success, and very, very slim, rewards as well. I mean, it depends on which country you're doing it from. It may be a lot of money, depending on which continent you live on. So that sort of swells it a bit. But yeah, it's definitely a problem. I think email itself has an issue that you cannot 100% trust the from part of an email address. You can't trust the name, and you can't 100% trust the email address. So there's definitely a broken process there that can be exploited. But yeah, the scale of it is sort of undeniable, but it's hard to get a real gauge on the true picture inside inboxes for users, because obviously you've got your segs, you've got your filters, you've got things that are preventing the kind of rawness and the volume of emails that are being sent from being seen by users. So I think that can affect awareness, because quite often you go in describing what's going on at large, and that's not reflective of their experience. That's not what they've seen. That, they may have seen a few things in the spam folder. The odd you've got a voicemail thing might creep through every 2 or 3 months, but largely we're describing a world that they can't relate to in some respects, I think. So
in terms of protection, would simply hovering over the name of the sender have defeated all of your pranks?
Yes and no. It would, to a certain extent, but I mean, often I would try and, make it their name. Your brain has a really interesting function that it can see something that isn't correct or hear something that isn't correct. And you won't be able to validate it, but you kind of jump to the conclusion that, oh, this is probably because they're using their personal address, or, oh, you get it all the time at home. Netflix goes bonkers for 5 minutes and you're like, oh, it's probably because of the internet, as vague as that. And these things are used a lot online. I saw it recently with a scam where they were telling a family member that their phone had malware on it and it could read this, that, and the other. And I thought, well, that's just completely made up. But they're relying on his sort of lack of knowledge to think, oh, yeah, that's plausible. I could see that happening type thing. So, yeah, it may have worked. It may not have worked. It depends, I guess.
So what do you suggest people do then to not become a victim of a scam like this?
Well, that's that's why it's $1 billion industry. Everyone's trying to solve that question. I would say the first thing that I would encourage anyone to do is just be aware of the shape of your email worlds. You've got like a personal email world, you've got a work email world, except that they're not just an infinite expanse of craziness. It might seem like that, but often it's people that are contacting you that or that you've invited into that world, or, they've been introduced into that world by your office. So there is a finite number of things that you should be seeing, and just get used to the interactions and the things that you're asked to do, because you're completely safe using email if you do nothing. So you only technically have to look out for a risk or turn your kind of security mindset on when you're doing something. And that might seem a bit crazy. It might be like, well, you can't do that every time. But I think if you place value in the things that you've been asked to do, so if you're about to put your credentials in to a page and you know that those credentials are valuable, because in a scammer's hands, they could use that to open different accounts, which might share the same password. They could use it to get into your actual account that you're using and contact your friends or your colleagues. I think knowing that there's some value to that action is better than trying to visually recognize if it's a threat, because then you can then start to qualify, is this an action that makes sense now? Has this come up before? Have I actually experienced the loss of this thing that it's purporting? Is this worth me doing now instantly? Shall I just ask somebody? And then you can forget about, you can ask somebody and you can forget about that. That risk is kind of, being validated by somebody else, or you can report it. And then you get back to your email and it's completely safe. So you only have to really turn on your security mindset when you're doing some, opening a document, is it completely ambiguous, the title been sent by? But there's only so much a human can do. You can't be 100% secure, as technology can't be 100% secure. because it's just impossible. You'd have to go into every email that you received, take apart the headers. You'd have to call the person that sent it. It doesn't work. So
if you only need to take action when you only need to, I guess, raise your security awareness when you're taking action, what are the common social engineering techniques that are used to trick us into taking actions?
In terms of trust, the first two out of the gate, as far as I'm concerned, are relevance and plausibility. Plausibility is almost like a scale of, does this seem like a scam or does this not seem like a scam? So the does this seem like a scam could be at this far end. It could be somebody that literally sends you an email saying, I am a scammer. Please, can you send me this money? Thank you. And, everyone can go, that's a scam, and recognize it. So everyone's got the kind of balances in the head of recognizing that. And then at the far end, you've got things that don't seem like a scam. And that's often because it contains personal information. It may initially not ask for anything, and then later on follows it up with an ask for something. I used it a lot with the emails that I sent by just putting a very personalized bit of information in. Like to the head of Homeland Security, I just mentioned that he and Jared had eaten some food in Iraq. I didn't know where they'd eaten. I didn't know if they'd eaten together, but they'd been in Iraq. I presume that they'd eaten at some stage. So that instantly sort of defangs the message to them, because it's like, well, they're constantly going, is this a threat? Is this a threat, in the back of the head? And it's like, this is not a threat. It's far too kind of personalized. This seems, it kind of drops the guard completely, and then you kind of in type thing. And I guess that's the key thing to sort of realize, that awareness tends to give you little red flags that you can spot in these things, putting pressure on you, email accounts about to be closed in the next 5 minutes, things that if you don't know about it, you would believe. But once you kind of know about that particular type of tactic, you start to see it a bit more. It's kind of fascinating as well, because the relevance issue is why sort of COVID email attacks became so sort of prevalent, because all of a sudden you've got a topic that's relevant to a huge number of people. So it's just a field day of figuring out what you can be plausible about dropping into their inbox.
Okay, that makes sense. One of the things you mentioned was that there's this multi-million-dollar industry to figure out how to help people stop falling victim to these scams. Are there any technical solutions that we can put in place that help? Like I know there's SPF, there's DMARC. How effective are they in preventing email fraud?
I think they're good for stopping spoofing. They're good for ensuring deliverability as well. I've recently done DMARC on my domains, not because I have a huge sender list. I just wanted to go through the process and see what was kind of involved in it, being a bit of an email fanboy. But yeah, in terms of the spoofing, I think it just shows that you care enough to try and stop it, I guess, by having DMARC. Otherwise somebody can hijack your brand and use the trust that the user has with that brand to try and trick them. So it's great from that. That's kind of what people can do to stop people pretending to be them, I guess. In terms of stopping the emails that come into your inbox, there seems to be quite a lot of interesting solutions to that. I guess they all have some sort of weakness at a certain level.
Awesome. All right. Thanks so much. Where can people learn more about you?
If you Google James Linton, I am the king of the James Lintons in the world of Google. So it's a big responsibility. There's I think there's a cricketer out there. He's quite good. But yeah, I'm the only InfoSec James Linton, and I just like exploring around at the minute. And my only mission statement is, and this is what I've had since I started doing my own thing, is how can I make scammers less successful against us? So the answers to that could change daily. Hopefully it doesn't, because that gets tiring, but it kind of gives me a lot of maneuver, I guess, and obviously social engineering, phishing, how humans interact with tech. That's kind of where I settle the most, obviously, I think.
Awesome. All right, James, thanks so much for coming on the show.
Oh, no problem. Happy to be on.
All right, that's it for this week. Thanks for listening and leaving reviews. If you have any comments or questions, I'd love to hear from you. I'm @Jamus on Twitter, or drop me an email at podcast@breachends.io. And if you're part of a security team that needs visibility into employees, customers, or third-party suppliers' breach credentials before criminals exploit them, head on over to breachsense.io to apply for a free 7-day trial. Thanks for listening, and I'll be back in your earbuds next Thursday morning.